The wind tore across the plains like it had lost something. It blew dry through the cottonwoods and slapped at the long rust-colored skirts of the girl kneeling in the dust. Her hands were raw, scraped open on the gravel where she'd fallen. Her bonnet was gone, taken hours ago, and her braids hung limp with sweat and grit. Behind her, the road stretched back into nothing. Ahead, the land rolled wide and empty. Martha Holt had not eaten in 2 days. She had not slept in 3. Her sisters, 3 of them, lay in the shade of the buckboard wagon, what little shade it offered, piled beneath a ragged quilt stitched long ago by hands now buried back east. Lizzie whimpered in her sleep. The baby Mercy hadn't cried in hours. That was worse, somehow. The mule was dead. Had dropped sometime after sunrise, its legs folding with a sick, slow grace. It had coughed once, keeled over, and never moved again. That left them nowhere to go, nowhere to stay. Just the sun burning down and the horizon indifferent to them all. Martha pulled herself upright, slow and shaking. Her dress stuck to her back. Her lips had cracked and bled, and when she opened her mouth, her tongue felt like paper. The bucket was empty. She'd tried to get water from the stream 2 miles back, but it was dust and dry roots. Everything was. They were alone. That fact stood taller than any tree, heavier than any wagon. Their mother was gone, taken by the fever that burned through Camp Hallett in August. Their father had not come back from the hills in June. Said he would scout out land to the west, find work, send for them by autumn. He never did. Martha had waited. She'd waited until the letters stopped coming, until the preacher had sold off their room in the boarding house, until the church food ran out. Then she'd taken what was left of the money, $6 and some, and found a wagon heading west. Told the man driving it she'd cook clean haul gear. He said she could ride halfway. He left them at a split in the road 4 days ago. Her legs buckled again. She fell to her knees, slow this time, her eyes still on the land ahead. There was something out there. She thought she saw a shape, but maybe it was a mirage. Her head throbbed with heat. Her breath felt thick and slow in her chest. Then came the sound. It was not thunder, though it held the same weight. It rolled through the dirt, a deep rumble that seemed to rise up through her bones. Hoofbeats. She knew that rhythm. Real this time, not imagined. A single rider. Martha pushed herself up, hand to her brow, blinking against the white sky. The figure grew as it approached. A horse. A man on it. Tall in the saddle, wide-shouldered, riding like he belonged to the land and not the other way around. She thought of stories. Bandits. Men who took what they wanted. Her fists closed. Her mind, even hollowed by hunger, stayed clear enough to think of her sisters behind her. The horse slowed. He dismounted without speaking, tying the reins to the axle of the wagon with practiced ease. He walked past her close enough that she caught the scent of leather, smoke, and hay toward the children under the quilt. Mercy stirred. Then he spoke low and calm. "You, their kin." Martha nodded, throat too dry to answer. "Your mule's done," he said. She nodded again. "You walkin'?" "No." Her voice cracked. "Not anymore." He crouched beside Mercy, who was blinking up at him with glassy eyes. He didn't touch her. Just looked, then turned back to Martha. "You got anywhere to go?" "Not now." He stood looking out over the plain like it might answer something. Then finally he looked at her. "My ranch is 2 miles east. Got watershade feed." He paused. "Not asking anything in return. Just don't sit here and die." She stared at him. She could barely hold herself up, but pride fought through the weakness. "Why?" He took a long breath. "Had a sister once. She didn't make it." Martha didn't trust him. Not fully. But the baby was breathing thin, and Lizzie was burning with fever. She couldn't carry them. She couldn't even lift the bucket. He untied a canteen from the saddle, offered it. "For the little one first." She took it with shaking hands and staggered back to the wagon. Mercy drank. So did Annie and Lizzie, their lips fumbling and desperate. When she turned back, he was watching. He did not smile. He did not speak again. He just nodded, turned, and walked toward his horse. The man's name was Ellie McKinnon. He spoke it plainly as they rode, like it was just a fact, not something to be admired or distrusted. He did not ask for hers. Martha offered it anyway, and he only nodded once. Behind him, the wagon creaked along slowly, the children nestled in the back beneath the quilt, and Martha sitting up front beside the reins, her eyes on the sway of the mule he'd brought to pull it. They reached the ranch near dusk. It wasn't grand. Just a squat house tucked against the rise of a hill, its roof slanted low like it was bracing against the wind. A corral. A barn with faded red paint. A hand pump out front. Chickens scratched at the dry earth. Nothing looked new, but it all looked solid. Ely watered the mule first, then the children. Martha watched him. He didn't speak much, but every movement was steady, like he'd been doing this work since boyhood. She saw the way his fingers moved, gentle near Mercy's small hands, checking for warmth, for breath. Not a father, maybe, but not unfamiliar with tenderness. Inside the house smelled of dry wood, old flour, and lye soap. One room, a wide hearth, a cast-iron stove. Cot in the corner table with 4 chairs, shelves stacked with books worn soft at the edges. A man's life quiet and unadorned. "You can take the bed," Ellie said, setting the baby down with practiced care. "I'll sleep in the barn." Martha didn't argue. Pride was heavy, but her limbs were heavier. The girls were asleep before she'd even pulled the quilt over them. She sat at the edge of the bed as night fell, staring out the narrow window. Her hands trembled in her lap. The silence here was different than the silence of the plains. This one was still, like breath held. She should have wept, but there was nothing left to spill. Just the ache in her throat and the sound of crickets outside. By morning the girls had color in their cheeks. Eli had left a pan of cornbread by the hearth with molasses and milk set beside it. Martha woke before them and ate little, watching the sun creep over the horizon like it wasn't sure it was welcome. He was in the field when she stepped out. Shirt sleeves, rolled hat pulled low, pulling wire from a fence post. "I can help," she said. He didn't turn. "You don't need to. I can't sit inside." Her voice was firmer than she felt. He looked over then, slow, as if measuring her. After a moment he nodded toward a pile of timber. "Those need hauling. Gates down on the north fence." So she hauled. Her back ached by noon, palms blistered before the sun reached its peak. But she didn't stop. Work meant motion. Motion kept despair quiet. Days passed that way. She cooked, cleaned, hauled wood. He never hovered, never questioned. They moved around each other like two people trying not to disturb the silence, both careful with it. But the silence started to shift. She caught him once watching the girls chase each other in the dirt yard, a softness in his face she hadn't expected. He showed Annie how to saddle a horse, slow and patient. He built Mercy a swing from old rope and a board. Martha fixed the broken hinge on his door, washed the soot from his windows. At night, after the girls were asleep, she'd sit by the hearth and sew the ripped edges of their clothes. Eli would sit at the table reading from an old book with no cover. They rarely spoke, but the silence grew warm like coals banked low. One evening she found a stack of lumber outside the house. "What's that for?" she asked. He didn't look up from the fence post he was digging. "Gonna build a bunkhouse." "For what, men?" "Not for men." He met her eyes then, and she understood. He wasn't offering charity. He was building something for them, for the 4 girls who arrived half dead in a broken wagon. For her. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "I know." He didn't say anything else. Just turned back to the earth and kept digging. If the frontier stirred you, subscribe and keep writing. The frame went up in 5 days. Martha watched it rise beam by beam from nothing but dry ground and intention. Eli worked in silence most of the time, hammering with steady rhythm, the muscles in his back straining through his shirt as he lifted and fixed each board. She offered to help, and he handed her nails without hesitation, like he didn't think she was too fragile or too proud. The girls ran in circles around them as they worked. Lizzie carried Eli's measuring stick like it was a sword. Annie tried to climb the rafters and got a splinter for her trouble. Even Mercy laughed again, a bright, high sound that startled birds from the fence line. The bunkhouse was small but solid. One room with a loft overhead, space enough for 4 beds below, and a stove in the corner. There were no curtains yet, but Martha brought in a linen sheet and cut it into panels. She sewed at night, her fingers calloused and quick. He noticed, but never said much, just made sure the windows opened smooth and the roof didn't leak. On the 6th night, it rained. She woke to the sound of it against the roof, slow and steady. The air was thick with the scent of wet dirt and summer grass. The children slept on pallets near her, wrapped tight in their quilts. She pulled her shawl around her shoulders and stepped out onto the porch. Eli was there already, sitting in the dark, the brim of his hat pulled low. She sat beside him without asking. "You can smell the cottonwoods," he said after a while. She nodded. "Hadn't rained in weeks before we came. Ranch needed it." They sat like that, just listening to the earth soak up the water. She could feel the warmth of him near her, not too close, just there, like a wall to lean on if needed. She thought of everything they'd been through, every night on the road, every prayer that went unanswered, every mile that nearly broke her. "You think things happen for a reason?" she asked softly. He was quiet a moment. "Then don't know. But sometimes they don't feel like accidents." The words settled deep. She wanted to believe them. Wanted to believe this quiet life wasn't just a pause before more suffering. "You always been out here?" she asked. He nodded. "My pa settled the land. Fought like hell to keep it. Died the spring I turned 20. Ma followed a year later. No siblings." He hesitated. "Had a sister, Eliza. She was younger. Got sick one winter. We couldn't get help fast enough." "I'm sorry," Martha said. He just looked out at the rain. She didn't press. She knew what it was to carry sorrow that words couldn't fix. When the clouds cleared, the world smelled new. The dust had settled and the wind was soft for once. She stood and turned toward the bunkhouse, then paused. "Thank you," she said, meaning more than just the building. Eli didn't respond right away. But when he looked up, his face was softer than she'd ever seen it. "You brought something back I didn't know I'd lost," he said. The next days were quiet but not heavy. Martha cooked while the girls fed the chickens. She found a way to mend the torn screen on the door and repainted the bunkhouse windowsills with a brush they found in the barn. Eli let Annie brush down the horses, patient even when she tangled the reins. He fixed a cradle from scrap wood, not because Mercy needed one, but just because he could. It wasn't spoken, but something was changing. This wasn't just survival anymore. One night, Martha found a tin box tucked on the top shelf in the corner of the bunkhouse. Inside were papers, old letters, brittle and yellowed, some written in a tight, neat hand. Maps. A photograph faded of a little girl and a woman standing in front of the ranch. She showed it to Eli the next morning. He stared at it for a long time. "My ma and Eliza," he said, voice rough. "She used to laugh like your Lizzie does." Martha didn't say anything, just stood beside him in the morning light. There were no promises, no grand declarations, but the earth had softened, and so had they. Trouble came on a Wednesday, riding a black horse and a grudge. The man wore a gray coat and a wide hat, the kind that kept the sun off and hid your eyes. His boots were polished too fine for this land, and he sat his saddle like he owned everything the wind could touch. Martha saw him from the field, the way he rode up slow, like the place didn't matter, just the man in it. Eli stepped out to meet him, wiping his hands on a rag. He didn't reach for a rifle, but he didn't smile either. "Ben Harrow," Eli said flatly. "McKinnon." The man tipped his hat, his voice smooth and wrong. "Heard you took in some strays." Martha stepped closer, her apron dusted with flour. She could feel the man's eyes on her. Not curious, measuring. "What's it to you?" Eli asked. Ben smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Nothing, I suppose. Unless that girl's name is Holt. Seems there's folks out east say she ran off with 3 children that weren't hers to take." Martha froze. Eli's face didn't change. "They're my sisters," she said, voice calm. "Our mother's dead. There's no one else." Ben looked amused. "No papers to prove it, I'd wager. Folks back in Kansas said she was meant to stay on as a ward. You left with a borrowed wagon and vanished? That looks a touch like kidnapping to some." Martha's hands curled into fists. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She had nothing. No letter. No will. Just the memory of her mother's last breath and the promise she'd whispered, "Don't let them take the little ones." "She's telling the truth," Eli said quietly. Ben's grin faded. "Maybe. But that's not mine to decide. Word is a man's headed this way soon. Lawman might want to have your story straight when he does." He turned his horse. "Shame, though. It's a nice piece of land. Would be a shame to see it tangled up in someone else's mess." He rode off without looking back. Eli stood still long after the dust settled. Martha couldn't speak. Her chest ached with fear and fury. She wanted to scream, to run, to dig a hole in the earth and bury them all safe where no law could find them. "I'll fix it," she said. Eli shook his head. "No, we will." He went to the barn. When he came back, he held a box. Inside was a thick, leather-bound ledger, a map, and an old land deed with his father's signature. "My pa taught me one thing," he said. "Paper don't always make something right, but it sure makes it harder to steal." He rode into town that day, came back late, his face unreadable, and handed her a folded envelope. Inside was a receipt, filed claim of guardianship, witnessed by 2 town elders. He'd vouched for her, said he would stand if anyone came asking. "I'll take the girls in if it comes to that," he said quietly. "But I don't think it will." She stared at the paper, at his name signed next to hers. The trust in it, the weight of it. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. He looked at her then, full on. No hat to shadow him, no guarded eyes. "Because I've lived empty too long," he said. "And you brought life back here?" She felt the tears sting, but she didn't cry. Instead, she reached out and touched his hand. Just for a moment. Just long enough. The next days passed with quiet tension, but no one came. The rider never returned. The lawman never showed. The prairie rolled on like nothing had happened, like the land itself had chosen to look the other way. And one morning, when the sun rose gold over the ridge, Martha woke to the sound of hammering again. She stepped outside. Eli was building something else now, a fence this time, around a patch of wild earth where flowers had started to grow. She brought him water. They stood side by side, looking out across the land. "You planning something?" she asked. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe a garden. Maybe a house bigger than 1 room. For who?" He looked at her, and this time he smiled. "For all of us. If you'll stay." She stayed. Not with a vow, not all at once, but in the quiet way a root finds water, stretching slow beneath the soil, steady and unseen. Days folded into weeks, and the girls began to laugh without flinching. Mercy learned to toddle barefoot through the soft grass behind the bunkhouse. Lizzie asked Eli to teach her how to tie knots and spit sunflower shells. Annie started calling the chickens by name. Martha found herself humming as she swept the porch. She mended shirts that weren't hers, left biscuits wrapped in cloth on the barn rail, and once, when he wasn't looking, brushed his coat clean with her own hands. Eli never asked for more, but every board he nailed, every row he plowed beside her seemed to say, "This is yours too if you want it." He built shelves in the bunkhouse, brought home books for the girls, even carved Mercy a wooden horse with tiny ears and a crooked smile. He told Martha about his father's Bible, about the first horse he broke, about how his sister used to sneak sugar cubes from the pantry when their ma wasn't looking. Martha told him about Kansas, about how their mother used to braid their hair at night and sing in a voice gone too soon. She told him about the night she packed the girls into the wagon, her hands shaking so hard she couldn't even light the lantern, about the way the world felt when no one was left to help. He listened like he was holding each word in his hands. Gentle, careful. Sometimes he'd speak after, sometimes not, but he never pulled away. One evening she found a new cradle inside the main house, rocked smooth, its base carved with wildflowers. She didn't ask, but she ran her hand along the wood and her throat tightened all the same. Autumn came slowly. The sky turned pale blue, stretched thin. The fields browned and bowed. The girls started lessons with chalk on scrap wood. Eli fixed the chimney. Martha planted onions and buried potatoes deep in the ground. They hadn't spoken of what came next. Not directly, but things were shifting as they always did before a season turned. One afternoon, while the girls napped, she stood beside him in the garden. "I've been thinking," she said. He kept digging dirt caked to his forearms. "About what?" "About building something proper, something that won't wash away next time the world tries." He looked up. The wind picked at the edge of her shawl, and for once she didn't fix it. "You mean a house?" he asked. She shook her head. "I mean a home." His face changed just slightly, but it was enough. "Then we'll build it," he said. "Together." That night he brought out a small box wrapped in oilskin. Inside was a ring, not gold, not polished, just silver and honest, set with a chip of turquoise and smooth from wear. "It was my ma's," he said. "Wore it every day after the wedding. Said it reminded her that hands can hold both work and love." Martha didn't speak. Her breath caught sharp, not from surprise, but from the way the moment settled deep and certain. He didn't kneel. She didn't cry. He simply held it out, and she took it, and something in the world clicked into place. The girls cheered when they found out. Annie drew a picture of a house with 5 windows and smoke curling from the chimney. Lizzie wanted to sew a dress from curtains. Mercy danced in the dirt. They were wed beneath the cottonwoods on a cool October morning. No preacher, just truth. No music, just wind. Eli wore his best shirt and Martha wore the shawl her mother left behind. She said her vows with a steady voice. He said his with his eyes never leaving hers. And when it was done, when the sun climbed high and the dust swirled in soft gold light, the 5 of them walked home together. That night Martha stood in the doorway of the bunkhouse, her fingers resting on the frame. Behind her, the children slept. Before her, Eli stacked wood, the fire casting long shadows across the yard. She watched him work, watched the rhythm of his life now folded with hers. A wind passed over the land, carrying the scent of sage and dry grass. The stars blinked awake. Somewhere a coyote called, but it sounded far off, softer than before. She stepped down and crossed to him, sliding her hand into his. They stood like that for a long while, saying nothing, with the whole world opening up in front of them. There's another fire burning ahead. Subscribe to find it.